well, one of the intriguing subplots, I think, behind all of this kind of genealogy of what has happened in Venezuela is Donald Trump, essentially, for all intents and purposes these days, being a political Floridian. He, of course, is a famous New Yorker by birth and for much of his career, but politically he's been aligned and living in Florida for many, many years now. It is his political home state. And, of course, telling as well that he wasn't announcing yesterday at the press conference everything that had happened from the White House briefing room or having been in the White House Situation Room, but instead he was in his retreat, really. The Russians call it a dacha, or dasha, the palatial setting of Mar-a-Lago in Palm Beach in Florida. He is someone now who is anchored in Floridian politics, and Floridian politics of all parts of the United States takes the keenest interest for obvious geographical, political, cultural regions in the politics of Latin America and South America. Marco Rubio also hails from that political lineage as well, telling he was there, but the Vice President, J.D. Vance, who is said to be a little more sceptical about what has happened, perhaps with an eye, of course, on 2028 and his own prospects in a MAGA movement which, of course, historically has been and set itself against American foreign entanglements. Donald Trump's own extraordinary rise to the presidency could not have happened without the twin midwives of the 2008 financial crash and everything that happened afterwards, and Iraq, which so completely delegitimized the old Republican establishment, the hawks, the neocons, the security hawks, the Dick Cheneys and John Boltons of this world, on whom Trump relied on his first term, but dispatched in his second term, and is now doing things that arguably would have made those men blush. Let's get the view now from Florida and from the United States with Angie Wong, who's US political commentator, Republican delegate from Florida, been celebrating, we understand, Maduro's capture on the streets of Florida in the last 24 hours. Angie, lovely to speak to you. Why have you been celebrating Maduro's capture?
Good morning, Lewis. Yes, we've been celebrating for over 24 hours now. As soon as the news broke here on the East Coast at 2 a.m. yesterday, we heard cars honking, we saw music blasting, and that's typical night in Miami, of course, but this was different. This was people lining up in Little Havana, going to Doral in Florida, and flying Venezuelan flags, and it was great. So I was part of that yesterday morning and been reporting on it. It's been so glorious because we have so many Venezuelan refugees here, and so many have fled with literally nothing. I have a barista that I love going to. Her family was very wealthy in Venezuela 10 years ago, and now she is working at a coffee shop because she's lost everything. So we hear stories like that over and over again. So they were just loving this because, once again, President Trump delivered.
There is a lot of concern in Europe and in the UK this morning, Angie, and there will be in the United States as well. Not from you and the people celebrating, perhaps, but from others. Not so much about the ends. No one really thinks that Maduro should have stayed in place. He was an illegitimate dictator. He'd subverted elections and so on. But about the means, about going in to a sovereign country in this way and abducting a foreign leader in this manner, the legal basis for that. Do you not have any concerns about that at all and the precedent that it sets?
Yes, and yesterday morning when I first heard the news break, I was thinking, well, why did the U.S. reach out to NATO? Why didn't we look into our allies so that we weren't the only ones going in? But then when you look at the legal basis of why Maduro and his wife was arrested, it was based on drug charges pending in the U.S. So they were convicted under Joe Biden in 2020 in the Southern District Court in New York, which I'm very familiar with. It's in Brooklyn. And they were then essentially extradited from Caracas to go to New York to face these charges. So that's what's happening here.
Well, they weren't really extradited, were they, Angie? I mean, an extradition implies a legal basis for that and a treaty between two countries. Your country kidnapped them.
Listen, we've been throwing around that word a lot, but apparently it is very legal. And I've actually seen this happen with much smaller players going into Costa Rica and going into Colombia.
Were they? They weren't extradited. They were abducted.
This was a very, very special extradition. Let's put it that way. Now, I mean, look, I agree with you. I think, in all fairness, I think that the UK, I think Starmer said it right, and other world leaders have said, look, this is going against international laws. And I think that's going to be tested. But who's going to test that? right? Which court of law is actually going to bring in the Trump administration to stress test whether or not there was a kidnapping or anything beyond an extradition? I don't know. And quite honestly, I don't know if they'll care, because now what you've seen is that you've been seeing celebrations around the world from freed Venezuelans.
So is it okay that the United States gets, because of its power and because you've got this extraordinary military and you've got this extraordinary might, it's okay that the United States is judge, jury, and executioner over everything that it does? And it could do this, as President Trump has said, it could do it again with other leaders. Is that a good thing?
And that's the messaging, isn't it? That is sending a message to Russia, to China, to Iran, to Colombia, who just closed its borders, to Cuba, to anyone who is an adversary to the U.S. And that's exactly what Marco Rubio, President Trump, and Pete Hegseth wanted to give out.
Well,
Look, is it okay? Of course not. I don't believe so. I just said, I think the UN, NATO, perhaps even other allies, maybe the UK could have joined in on this. But they didn't.
But it could send a different message, couldn't it, Angie? It could send a message to Beijing and to Moscow that as long as you've got the military clout, you can do whatever you want, and that you could do something like this as well. What is to stop President Putin deciding, well, actually, it's in our national security interest, we're going to try President Zelensky in a Moscow court, and then when we're able to, and when we've got the military capability, we're going to conduct our own special military operation, so to speak, a special extradition, so to speak, and remove him to Moscow and put him on trial. What's to stop them doing that?
There's nothing stopping, except for all the European leaders that will make sure that never happens, right? And also NATO. I mean, there are plenty of protective walls around Zelensky.
The thing that stops, or the argument would be, the thing that stops that from happening is that everybody, even if you've got the power to do that, you don't do it because we have some degree of international rulemaking around this that says you don't. And your president just blew that to bits.
That's correct. And I've seen him time and time again. I've been covering this guy for over 6 years now, and he does not play by the rules. He understands, after all the lawfare that him and his family has gone through during the Joe Biden years, that he is just going to do things, and then you catch him. And I think, look, it is definitely unorthodox, but he's doing it. And right now, he's winning the messaging on it. He's winning the narrative on it. And who's going to challenge him? So far, none of his allies, other than Russia stepping up saying something. I think Nigel Farage said something, then took it back. I mean, no one is actually going to challenge this guy because they removed the problem. The U.S. removed the problem. We're not installing a leader. We just removed a problem. And hopefully there'll be elections in Caracas and all over Venezuela soon to elect a real
Only if Trump
leader.
likes that leader. He made it pretty clear yesterday that whoever that leader is has got to be a leader that he approves of. What kind of message is that to the people of Venezuela? Don't they deserve to choose?
Well, they're going to have elections, right? So they were hoping that the Vice President Rodriguez would stay on, but she fled, apparently. That's the rumor, that she fled to Russia. That's not confirmed, by the way, but I have heard several sources say that. So there's really, it's going to be another Haiti if we're not careful, where all the parliament just fled the country. There's no quorum to actually hold elections. So he's going to ensure that something happens. And look, the whole world is watching him. We're not going to take over Venezuela as another United States, right? This is not going to be in addition to what we're doing. But yes, of course, I'm sure President Trump will control some of the levers on the political front, especially with the incoming leader. There's a lot of special interests there, especially oil for the U.S., and we are very cognizant of that. But again, I think Marco Rubio is a little bit scared that he's going to take on another job this morning and become the president or the temporary president of Venezuela.
Should we be concerned that this president isn't going to stop at Venezuela? We saw the wife of the deputy chief of staff at the White House, Stephen Miller, tweet out a picture of Greenland with an American flag emblazoned on it saying "soon" in capital letters. Is the US coming for Greenland?
Oh, 100%. President Trump pretty much on day one wanted Greenland. Remember, he also wanted Canada. He also wants the Panama Canal. Look, you can't not call this guy a modern day imperialist, right? He wants the same thing that Putin wants, that Xi Jinping wants, that even Bibi Netanyahu wants. They want more land. And right now, I don't think anyone is pushing to stop him, but he's not going into wars necessarily. He's not like Putin going in and just bringing in the troops across the border. He's trying to make a deal. And whether or not that deal is successful, we're not sure. But we know that the envoy working on Greenland, this is not going to be boots on the ground. We're not invading. This is certainly more an art of the deal president who's going to do something, hopefully, to secure Greenland.
Does it depress you, Angie? Does it not depress you that many of us around the world, many in America, always thought that perhaps America was rather better than this, that America wasn't imperialist, that America won over the rest of the world because of her ideas and the principles that your country stood for. And instead, you're basically talking about your president and your country in the same breath and in the same way, with the same ends and the same means as the Xis and the Putins and the Chinas and the Russias of the world. Is that not rather depressing?
No, we just want to be more like the Brits here, right? We want to have more land and we want to have more resources.
You want to be more like the British Empire?
Sure. Only because, look, we're coming on to our 250-year anniversary of America this year. And what happens with a lot of these empires is that it plateaus. In fact, the United States, we've pretty much, like, where else are we going to go? We have only a limited amount of resources, only a limited amount of land. We need a lot of energy to go into the next phase of the Industrial Revolution, which is AI, right? And to be competitive, we need to have those energy sources. We may have some of them, we may have some rare earths, but we need more if we're going to be dominant. And I think that's what's happening here. It's a longer discussion, but that is what President Trump is trying to procure, because guess what? China has already procured that. So Russia is procuring that.
So because you need extra resources, that gives you the right to go and procure them by any means necessary.
Well, it's not by any means necessary. This is a different style of procurement, but isn't that how it goes? Isn't that how all of these conflicts begin? But we're not looking to start wars.
Your President Jefferson once described the United States as being an empire of liberty. Doesn't sound very much like that anymore. It just sounds like a good old-fashioned empire, the way you're talking about it.
Look, I could be a lot more blunt about it because President Trump cannot, right? Clearly, the arrest of Maduro, that was done under the guise of a drug trafficking conviction, right? The larger pullback picture is that he wanted the oil companies to go back into Venezuela and secure whatever deals they had prior to the president coming into office, his second term. That's the guise of all of this, because it makes the news that way. It gives a narrative. But the reality is, anyone can see this pretty clearly. We want to secure oil and we want to secure it for the United States.